Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Cheryl Selman, and welcome to The Love Code. This is a show that is designed to uplift, to inspire, to transform, to reconnect us to the web of life. And I am so thrilled you are with us because we have a wonderful conversation today that really is going to open our hearts and expand our compassion and understand how we are truly connected to all of life. And before we go there, I definitely want to welcome anyone who's listening for the very first time. I invite you to go to my website, which is drcherylselman.com, because I then send out the archive shows every week. So if you happen to miss one of them, it'll come right to your inbox, and you won't have to miss any of them and listen to them at a convenient time for you. And there's also all sorts of other information that I send out on a regular basis, so you'll just kept informed, or you can listen through my Facebook page, which is What Women Must Know. That's my Facebook page, and I put all of the archive shows on my Facebook page. And my Facebook page is called What Women Must Know because that is the name of the other show I do every week on Progressive Radio Network, every Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. So if you opt in to my website, Dr. Cheryl Selman, or like me over at What Women Must Know, you'll get both of those shows sent to you, and you'll be happy you did because I have fantastic guests and great information that uplifts, transforms, empowers, so why not take advantage of the opportunity? So speaking of taking advantage of the opportunity, I'm so happy to be introducing you to my guests today because we're going to be talking about our Symphony with Animals on health, empathy, and our shared destinies, which is what our topic is all about. All of you animal lovers will really love this show, and those of you who aren't too sure about being animal lovers, after our show today, you'll probably want to run out and hug an animal, at least if not adopt one for yourself. And my guest today is Aysha Akhtar, who is a double certified doctor in both neurology and preventive medicine and has a master's degree in public health. And in addition to that, she is the deputy director of the Army's Traumatic Brain Injury Program. Previously, she worked for the Office of Counterterrorism and Emerging Threats of the Food and Drug Administration. She is a lieutenant commander in the U.S. Public Health Service, in which she deploys to assist with national public health emergencies. She is also a fellow of the Oxford Center for Animal Ethics and is a consultant editor for the Journal of Animal Ethics, and she is the author of Animals and Public Health and lives in Maryland. So, Aysha, it's so good to have you on the show. Thank you for being with us. What an interesting life you have.
Thanks. It sounds more interesting on paper, I think. But thanks for having me, Cheryl.
You're so welcome. It's great service that you're doing, so I want to thank you for how you're contributing to our health and well-being. And I've been going through your book, reading the stories. It's a really compelling book. Aysha, I want to congratulate you on making this book so touching. People really feel the power of the message that you have. So we're going to talk about so many of the inspiring stories and the research that is emerging, understanding our relationship with animals. And for me, in reading your book and going through so many of the profound healing stories, it just reminds me that we as humans are connected to this web of life. We are part of nature, and the more we reconnect, in whatever way we do that, with nature, the more we reconnect with ourselves, and the healing happens as a result because we're whole again. We're connecting to our wholeness. That really resonated with me when I was going through your book and what you were sharing in your book. So I think we should begin by asking you what is it about your personal journey that led you to write this book and become so involved with the world of animals and the relationship, the healing relationship between animals and humans?
Sure, and thank you so much, Cheryl. I love the way you put it. We get to know ourselves better when we are connected with the web of life. And you might be aware of the fact that the UN report just came out and showed how we are being devastating to all other species on this planet, basically. And what we're seeing is that how we live and what we do does touch upon all other life on this planet, and vice versa. Their lives are going to impact our well-being as well. So, and that's basically the main thesis of this book. But getting back to your question about what led me to write it, so I wrote it from both a sort of a personal stance and also from a professional stance. So when, as a child, I was sexually abused by an uncle for many years. And I got to know my grandparents, who ended up living next door, adopted a dog named Sylvester. And he was the first animal I ever got to know. I was 9 years old at the time. And Sylvester and I just fell absolutely in love with each other. I can't imagine a day when I did not have Sylvester, doing something with Sylvester during that time. But unfortunately, Sylvester ended up having his own story in that he was also abused by a different uncle. And over the many months as I was experiencing the heartbreak of his abuse, something happened. At some level, I understood the connection between his abuse and my abuse. I understood that violence is violence, no matter who it's toward. And my empathy for Sylvester taught me to speak out against his abuse, gave me the courage to speak out and end his abuse. And that eventually led me to have the courage to end my abuse as well. So, there was that personal story, that personal connection with Sylvester. It was my empathy for him that changed my life for the better, as well as his life. And ever since I met Sylvester and got to know him, I've had animals in my lives in one way or another. Now, I cannot live without animals. I just adore them. And so now, as a neurologist, I'm looking back at that time with Sylvester, and I'm looking at that empathy that I had for him. And now I want to explore as a professional, where does this empathy for animals come from? How do we develop it for animals? How does it affect our well-being when we have that empathy for animals? And on the flip side, what happens when we suppress or ignore our empathy for animals? Do we suffer as a result from that, both as individuals and as a society? And given my true love for animals and my interest in health, I thought it was just something that we needed to explore. It's an issue that really no one else has done, really. No one's really taken a look at our relationships with animals as a whole, and not just, our cats and dogs, but as a whole, and looked at how those relationships impact our well-being.
As you're talking, it brings to mind a documentary I just watched on Amazon Prime. Just kind of flipping through, and there was a documentary called Life Adjusted. And it had a picture of a horse on the front, so I thought I'd check it out. It was such an interesting documentary. It was a documentary about a chiropractor whose work is focused on healing horses through adjustment, through chiropractic adjustments, to get their nervous system functioning again, which changes their behavior, reduces or eliminates their pain, but it's their neurology that is changed. And the documentary was about this one particular horse that had been very abused and very traumatized and acted out with, fear, a lot of fear, wouldn't let anyone get close to her and wouldn't interact with anyone. And what happened when he was able to do some adjustments on her, and how that being totally changed, became much more integrated, much more whole, and as a result, operated in the world in a totally different way, from a place of more curiosity and safety and let people touch her and connect. It was so moving. But here's the thing. As he was talking about this experience with this horse, he was also talking about his abusive childhood and how his father used to really beat him. And through this whole experience of dealing with this very wounded horse, he opened up about his experience and got very emotional about what he went through in childhood and how he really deeply connected with this horse in a way that he had never connected with any other horse, nor had ever felt the depth of emotion as he felt when he worked on that horse.
Sounds like a beautiful story, and that's something that I've found a lot with the people that I've interviewed. So there's and the stories that I've come up with and brought forth in my book. There are a lot of cases of people, children or adults, who some way or another who've been traumatized or felt like the world was letting them down, that humanity was letting them down. And for these individuals, it was their connection with animals that, in a sense, healed them mentally and spiritually and even physically. And I think the reason why that connection with animals is so good for us is because, and thank God for this, other animals are not like us. You know, they're for example, I love my parents. I loved them. But they can annoy me. They can tick me off like crazy at times, right? And, so we have these very complicated relationships with each other. But with other animals, the complexity is gone. It's a much simpler and in some ways a purer relationship that we have with other species. It comes down to basic kindness. If you are kind to them, they'll treat you well and they'll show that friendship back to you. And so I think because of that, so many people are able to get the meaningful connection with other animals that they don't necessarily get with other humans. And it is a healing process for them in that regard. You know, animals, they release us from the human-generated pressure in our lives, right? They don't compete with us like other humans. They don't care one whit what we look like, how much money we make, whether you've been, how far in your career you've gone, or whether you have a career. They don't care about any of that. All they care about is are you kind to them and you show friendship to them, and then they'll show it back. And I think that's why it's so important to continue to have these relationships with animals for our sake as well as theirs.
What have you found as a neurologist? I'm sure this is an area of interest to you. What have you found that occurs with our nervous system when we interact with animals?
So there are studies that are coming out. The studies are just really starting to emerge because medicine has traditionally ignored this part of our lives, ignored our relationships with animals. So, but the studies that are coming out are showing that, for example, if you're with a companion animal, a dog or a cat, immediately you can experience some health benefits that are measurable. So if you're petting a purring cat or playing with a friendly dog, your blood pressure goes down, your heart rate goes down, your hormonal system can be balanced in a way that makes you feel good. And we also can see a rise in what's called oxytocin, which is a neurochemical that's released that makes us feel good, and it makes us feel connected with others, and it makes us feel even more empathetic with others. And so we're seeing that with people who are, when they're in the presence of animals, and we're seeing the other as well. We're seeing that with other animals when they're in our presence, and it's a good presence, it's a good, relationship, that they're experiencing these changes in their bodies and the increase in oxytocin and other neurochemicals that make them feel good.
Well, that would make sense. They are sentient beings and they have emotions, and, it's obvious that they feel things, and when they are in a loving environment, they are affected by that energy, as is the human who they're with, their companion. So that makes perfect sense. Do you think that humans in our culture, in our society, are anthropomorphizing animals too much, see them as their children? And I recently had an interview with an author who is an animal surgeon, veterinary surgeon, and he's, was talking about these very complicated and expensive surgeries and procedures that are now being done on animals, which would never have happened in the past, nor have prolonged their lives in the way that these procedures are potentially doing.
I think that for example, there's this new health care that's available for our companion animals that wasn't before, right? So now we have specialists, cardiologists, neurologists, dentists, anesthesiologists that 20, 30 years ago was rare. But now they're much more common for our companion animals. And I think that reflects not that we're anthropomorphizing our animals, but that we are acknowledging the love that we have for animals, and that, we are less, there's a decreased stigma to acknowledge openly that, yes, we can love these animals, and we love them dearly. They are our family. And part of that, I think, is that we're recognizing, whether explicitly or implicitly, we're recognizing that we are losing some connectedness with animals in the everyday world. We are more urbanized now. People are less likely to go out and interact with, free-roaming animals. We have them less in our lives, so we're seeking animals in other ways, and we're bringing them into our homes. And we can and we do love them, and I think that's a good thing. I think that's a very good thing. There is no limit to human compassion, and that should never be there should never be a stigma or a negative quality to the love that we can feel for another species. I think that just shows how wonderful the human species can be, to show that we are capable of that kind of love for a member of another species. And as far as anthropomorphizing animals in general, the problem was really the opposite for a long time. People and scientists were denying that animals were capable of emotion, and that they had rich inner lives, and that they had lives that were separate from ours. They had, complex physiologies and neurochemistry, and that they actually do think. Heavens forbid for us to say that animals think and they feel. So if we tend to anthropomorphize them a little bit, that's all right. I'll take that over the opposite.
Okay, well, point well taken. So tell us some of the most inspiring stories that you came across and wrote about in your book, Our Symphony with Animals.
God, there are so many. One that I love, I'll tell you, one person I truly enjoyed meeting was David Lee, and he is a social worker at one of the worst penal institutions in the country. It was a notorious penal institution in the country from the moment it was built back in the early 1900s up until the 1970s. And it was the Ohio State Penitentiary for the criminally insane. And David Lee was a social worker there. And this is a place where there was a lot of abuse of the inmates, just a lot of horrible abuse of the inmates. And it wasn't until an undercover investigation revealed what was going on, what had been going on at this institution for decades. And these were inmates who, some of them had committed some very heinous crimes, murders, robbery, sexual assault, rape of women and children. At the same time, their basic rights were being denied, and they were themselves being cruelly treated. And a lot of these inmates were depressed or had their own mental illnesses as well. And David Lee, at some point in the 1970s, he he decided to try to bring in some animals into the hospital to see if that could cheer up some of the lives and help rehabilitate some of the patients. And it was remarkable, the effect. So at first he brought in fish and birds, and the effect it had on the patients was almost immediate, and it was lasting. And you read about these guys, mostly men, who were some of them were quite brutal, and yet they would talk about their fish or their birds and how they love those critters and how they were able to feel peace when they were around those animals, peace that they hadn't felt before. And some of them would talk about how they started to experience kindness that they hadn't had before, or they had not felt before. I mean, there were even some cases of some of them who refused to leave the institution when they were finally discharged, refused to leave unless they could take their fish with them or unless they could take their birds with them. And that's how much those animals meant to them. And it's really a remarkable story. And David himself is just a wonderful person to meet. He's a jolly fellow. I can just see he must have been a great social worker. And the story is really inspiring, and it's a piece of history that I think a lot of people don't know about, and I certainly didn't know about at the time. And it was very fortunate to unravel this story, and it was quite an experience talking with David and visiting the penitentiary and learning about the inmates and how their lives changed after forming this empathy with other animals.
Well, tell us more about that experience, because in your book there is more what went on there as he began to introduce animals into that institution.
Yeah, so it initially started as a test, sort of a pilot study, and David brought in the fish and the birds into two wards. Two of the wards that house inmates as an initial 60-day trial period, and his thought was that if it indicated at all that there could be success, that he was going to seek approval from the administration to continue this. Well, my God, just in the 60 days, he saw such a tremendous improvement among the patients, the inmates, who had these encounters with animals in comparison with very similar wards that had no animals. He saw patients who had never spoken before or had not spoken the entire time they were in the hospital suddenly speak. And they were speaking about the birds and speaking about the fish. And they were speaking with each other. So they were connecting with each other and connecting with David more than they had before. And he was seeing how the suicide rates had dropped to zero on these wards where the animals were, even though on the comparison wards the suicide rates were still quite high. And he saw on how the patients were able to cut their medications by half or even more so after they started forming these relationships with animals. So it was such a remarkable story. News reporters from all over then came to report about not a heinous penal institution anymore, but this remarkable story about how animals are touching the lives of inmates that were considered irredeemable.
So as a neurologist, what do you think happened to these people who obviously are very wounded? You don't become a serious criminal unless you've had some trauma in your own history and put into a situation that is very abusive as well. So these inmates turned into these very different kinds of people, and they not only had companions that they really opened their heart to, but it changed them. Their whole behavior changed, their whole conditions changed. So as a neurologist, what do you think went on or goes on when we have these experiences, especially with people who are extremely wounded?
Right. And, I will, yeah, exactly. And I will say it doesn't always work out that way. Some people, are harder to get through. But the fact that, just something as simple as having an animal companion could change someone, maybe not completely, but make some real changes in their mindset, can be extremely powerful. And I think why animals touch these inmates so deeply was that these are people who were used to being systematically abused in this penal institution. The abuse was just overwhelming, day-to-day abuse. And suddenly, when they met these animals, they were around animals who did not care about their past history. They didn't care if they were criminals or not. They didn't care about anything else other than were these people going to be kind to them, right? So animals were judging them only by how kind they were to them. And I think that was something that was a chance for a lot of these folks to show that kindness that may have been there, but they never really had a chance to manifest it before. And also going back to the things that we talked about before, like the release in oxytocin and other neurochemicals, I think there's something to that as well, that when these guys were in the presence of animals, if they feel calmer in the presence of animals and their oxytocin and other feel-good neurochemicals are released, they're less likely to be violent. They're more likely to be social with each other and to form good social relationships as well.
So the best medicine really is building a relationship with animals, because it has all of those emotional and physiological changes occurring in your body when you are interacting with another animal. Even fish. I mean, I find that to be really fascinating. One of the stories about one of the inmates who had a special relationship with these angelfish that would only come up to him and no one else. That to me was such a wonderful story.
It is. And, people think that fish aren't capable of feeling emotion and pain. They're animals. They have the same basic neurological system as the rest of us. So why wouldn't they? And, yeah, you're right. This guy, he formed a very personal relationship with the angelfish, and he was one of them who said that I'm not leaving unless I can take my angelfish with me. Unfortunately, that wish was granted. So, yeah, there are some truly remarkable stories there. And, as I said before, it doesn't always work, but it can work. And when it does, it can work greatly.
And what happened to that penitentiary for the criminally insane? Where is it now?
It's still there in Ohio, but eventually it was shut down. It's just an empty, huge concrete complex. It's the second largest poured concrete structure in the world after the Pentagon. So it's just a building of broken up windows and broken down doors now. It's just sitting there, unfortunately. Wow. So the Ohio built a smaller hospital nearby that they use now.
So I'm just curious, have other systems, institutionalized systems, carried on with this type of therapy?
Oh, sure, yeah. Lots of prison systems today are using this idea. There are a lot of programs, and this is the best of both worlds. There are a lot of programs where inmates are helping to socialize animals like dogs and cats that will then help these animals be more adoptable. So the inmates are feeling good because they're getting a companionship and a friendship that they often don't get otherwise in prison systems, and they're helping the animals get adopted. So it's a win-win for both. And this is something that's occurring throughout. There's a new program that started a few years ago in Indiana, which I write about. There's a cat sanctuary there in which the inmates are helping to socialize these cats to help them get adopted out. And at the same time, the inmates are, experiencing the benefits of being with these creatures who love their company.
Not easy to socialize a cat, I would imagine.
You'd be surprised. I think a lot of, it all comes down to how bad of a life they've had, just like with humans, right? So if they've been abused or have had a very hard life, they're going to be a little bit more mistrustful. But it can be you can break through that with enough patience and time.
So let's talk about how animals can heal people with a post-traumatic stress disorder who've been traumatized in that way. What are some of the stories or some of the research that's going on in that area?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people are now aware of the fact that Marine veterans and other military veterans are, experiencing very high rates of post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD and other mental illnesses like depression and general anxiety. And it's coming to light that companion animals can really help heal them. Not heal 100%. There's rarely such a thing that can heal 100%, but really heal them to a great degree when nothing before had. And one of the people I interview, one of the stories I tell is that of a Marine veteran who had fought in Afghanistan and lost friends and had killed a teenage boy, which troubled him greatly and caused him a lot of distress. And when he came back to the U.S., he experienced a real shutdown, and he experienced severe PTSD. He was verbally abusive to his family. He was abusive to himself in the sense that he just didn't care about living anymore. He was, doped up on so many drugs, and he just lost the will to really to survive well. And he had tried so many things. His wife dragged him from therapist to therapist, to trying different drugs, to trying psychotherapy, to trying light therapy, to trying yoga, to trying so many different things, both traditional medicine and non-traditional medicine, and nothing really worked. And it wasn't until they learned about this Canines for Warriors program that things really turned around for them. And the Canines for Warrior program is a program in which they take dogs from shelters, so dogs who are very close to being put down. They take these dogs and they train them to be therapy dogs, in a sense, for warriors with PTSD. And after this individual had matched up with a dog he named Axel, he saw the benefits immediately. This is a guy who wouldn't talk to anyone, who has shut himself in his basement for months, was only texting to his wife and kids. He would talk about if he went out to the laundry in a week. If he went out to the laundromat, for example, that was a good week for him. But the moment he met Axel, that first day, they were out all over town. He was finally able to go and see his son's baseball game, and he was interacting and being part of life in a way that he wasn't for a number of years. And so it was remarkable the change that occurred in him. And so we're seeing that more and more, and it's not just with dogs, it's with many animals. It can be with pigs, it can be with chickens, it can be with turkeys, it can be with mice. It's just, I think people, again, there's not that human-generated pressure when you're interacting with another animal. So I think that's what's so important about those relationships with other animals in particular.
That's such an inspiring story. That's really where the magic is, when you see someone who's so crippled, emotionally, have a transformation, almost immediately. When we reconnect with other beings, it's almost a magical experience. It's really hard to even fully comprehend why that is happening and how it's having its impact, but it is.
It definitely is, and so much so that the Veterans Administration now is doing long-term studies on canine companionship for veterans with PTSD, and others are doing the same thing.
Yes, that's wonderful. So in your book, you talk about some of the positions that are being taken through Congress in relationship to animal cruelty, actually passing laws. What's come of that? Where are we in that regard?
So I think what you're referring to is the, I can't remember, the Pet Safety Act. I can't remember the exact name, but this is an act that was passed through Congress after Hurricane Katrina. And if you recall, during Hurricane Katrina, not only were we seeing so many people being affected, we're also seeing a lot of the companion animals affected by the devastation of the hurricane. Reports were coming out of rescuers refusing to rescue the companion animals, right? They wouldn't allow dogs and cats in the shelters or on the boats or in the buses. And as a result, a lot of people stayed behind. That was one of the most common reasons why people stayed behind, was that no one would help them take care of their companion animals or rescue them. So there were thousands of animals perished during the hurricane, and it caused such an outpour of anger and grief in the U.S. that almost immediately after the hurricane subsided, this new act was written and then passed, in which basically rescuers have to rescue our companion animals as well during any kind of emergency, whether it's a public health emergency or emergency from weather or some other devastating effect. That we have to treat, that we have to acknowledge that companion animals are our families, and if you're going to rescue people, you need to rescue their animals as well.
Wow, that's a huge leap for mankind.
Yeah, and it was such a big deal at the time, and so now it's almost it's a given that people aren't going to leave without their dogs and their cats or their other critters, but at the time during Hurricane Katrina, it was such an eye-opening event for government. Government didn't realize how much we care about our animals. And I think they finally got the message.
Well, so, as you're talking, it just seems to me that our understanding and honoring our relationship with all of life and with other species, with other animals, is part of the evolution of humanity, because to the degree we see animals as just vehicles for wealth or for outlets of frustration or for our own enjoyment, for hunting, for whatever, trophy hunting particularly, it really is disconnecting us from our relationship with life. And it seems that there is a growing awareness, an appreciation for animals and the healing that animals give us, because we are evolving and hopefully changing some of the practices that we have instituted, like factory farming at some point may change as a result of this growing evolution of consciousness. What are your thoughts about that?
I totally agree with you, and this is something I really wanted to explore as well. It was important for me not just to write about just the feel-good stories, the stories of where we have been good to animals and they're good to us, or their relationships help us, but to look at where we drop the ball, in a sense, where we lose that empathy for animals or suppress it, and to explore what are the repercussions, not just to the animals, but also to us as individuals and as a society. And it's really coming to light slowly, but it's coming to light, and this is something that I really draw out in the book, that how we treat animals comes back to us. When we're kind to animals, we find that our lives are better impacted, and when we're cruel to animals, our lives are the worse for it. I I take some tours of factory farming. I discuss animal testing and many other issues, which are more of the systemic abuses of animals, right? So these aren't cases where you have a rogue criminal out there who's abusing a dog, but these are what we call systemic abuses. They're societal abuses that we're all in basically contributing to in some way or another. And I wanted to look at how does that affect us. And what was really coming to light was that the violence we see from other animals is seeping into our society as well. It does seep into society. And it's something that we need to start taking a harder look at and really asking ourselves, is this what we want, not only for animals but for ourselves? And, do we want a life where we are cruel to animals and it revolves around the abuse of animals, or do we want lives where we are doing what we can, at least consciously, to try to alleviate suffering where we can?
So do you see anything changing in the way we have commercialized animals yet, or is this not quite the change we are, heading for in the moment?
Right. So I think we're at a peak in the suffering we're causing to animals worldwide, right? With the human species causes more suffering in animals than ever before in our history. And that's in part because of how we've mechanized abuse against animals and made it a systemic part of so many of our day-to-day practices and businesses. And so we're at that peak, and I think we're going to reach a threshold when, and I think that's coming soon, that threshold when we will start to really say, no, we don't want this anymore. And I think we're starting to see more and more people really thinking about these things, and we're hearing about these, lab-grown meats and plant-based products that are being implemented throughout the country, and even China's taking them up, and Burger King now is going to have one of these products, and it's getting a lot of interest, right? Because people are realizing that how we eat impacts our health, right? So it can impact our risk for strokes and diabetes and obesity. It impacts our climate. It impacts our planetary health. And it impacts the well-being of animals. And more people are starting to say that we don't need to be that way. It does not need to be that way. And there are alternatives if we choose them.
Well, I don't know about lab-grown meat, Aysha. I don't think I'd want to be eating that stuff at all. But I hear what you're saying, and I think it's coming back to honoring all of life and approaching life and animals from that place of respecting life and respecting those beings and having a relationship with them. And I do remember speaking to a very spiritual farmer who raised cattle, and she raised cattle for her family, to feed her family. And she honored this animal, she blessed this animal, she asked the animal for permission when it was time to, come to the end of his life to slaughter this animal. And this cattle, actually, this cow, steer, whatever it was, when it knew it was his time to be sacrificed into this wheel of life, actually bowed its head and gave permission. It's the way the Native Americans approach their relationship with buffaloes. It was with respect, with permission. It was with honoring, only doing what was necessary and giving gratitude to life. Because life is sacrificing itself to us all the time. It's this continual recycling of everything in life, supporting the continual growth of all life. So I guess I think that what we really want to do is, first of all, understand the intelligence in all life, that all life is alive, that does have intelligence, and we need to have respect in whatever way we choose to have a relationship for whatever purpose. But senseless killing, cruelty, these factory farms where these animals are perceived as things, not beings, is so heart-wrenching to see how far we have disconnected ourselves from that web of life that we started our conversation with. And that's why your book is such an important remembrance of the power that these beings in the animal kingdom. I mean, you know, I travel a lot, so I actually don't have any companion animals, but I have companion plants. So I have a relationship with my orchids.
You have to have a good relationship if you want to keep them alive. Yeah, they're hard to take care of.
Yeah. But you know, they bring me the same joy and pleasure as if I had an animal, you know, although they're not really talking as loudly and behaving in the same way. But, you know, they are healing. And I just want you to touch on one other thing while we still have some time, and that's how our relationship with other beings, and I would include my plants in there, my orchids, how they are reducing our risk of disease and illness. Can you help elaborate on that point?
Sure. So we can start from the individual and go to the societal, I guess. So on an individual level, when you have a positive, friendly relationship with another animal, we have shown that people's health can be dramatically improved. There was a study that was a groundbreaking study at the time done in the end of the 1970s in which the researchers compared the longevity of patients who had recently had a heart attack. So they split them in half. So they looked at those with companion animals and compared them with those without companion animals. And they found a significant likelihood of surviving among those patients who had companion animals. So their survival rate at 1 year was a lot higher if they had dogs or cats or some other companion animals. And it didn't matter whether it was dogs or cats. So it didn't have anything to do with getting more exercise because you're walking your dog. They saw this effect with cat companionship as well. We don't know exactly why. You know, as I mentioned, science is just starting to really explore these issues, but why our being with other animals can improve our health. But in the short term, we've seen our cardiac reactivity to stress is evened out. Our heart, we've seen that we not only respond to stress better, but we get to our baseline more quickly in the presence of other animals. Cardiovascular health is improved. Our mental health is improved. You know, we're seeing a lot of changes in our neurochemistry. So all of these things are definitely have an ability to have a tremendous effect on our health and improve our own health. Exactly how and exactly what is occurring, we don't know yet, but we do know that it does exist. Not with everyone, but it does exist. So that's on an individual level. And I would say that on a societal level, there's a lot that shows the flip side. If we're cruel to animals, it is that cruelty and that violence is seeping into society. There was a major study that was looking at slaughterhouses and violence in the towns where there are slaughterhouses here in the U.S. And it's been well known for a long time that the building of a slaughterhouse comes with increased crime rates in a town. But no one really fully understood why there is an increase in crime in towns where there are slaughterhouses. A lot of theories were that, you know, the slaughterhouses were because there was high turnover and stress, and that they're very unkind to the workers who work in these slaughterhouses. But one psychologist wanted to take a look and see if the act of inflicting violence, of causing harm to an animal, can be a reason why we're seeing violence in other forms in these towns. And so she compared towns with slaughterhouses, and she looked at all the crime rates in those towns with slaughterhouses and compared them to towns where there are similar types of industry that were just as stressful, had as many injuries, had many of the same characteristics as slaughterhouses, but they did not involve causing harm to another. And what she found was a tremendous correlation between the crime rates in these towns and slaughterhouses that she did not see with these other types of industries. In fact, with some of the other types of industries, crime rates went down, particularly rape of women and abuse of children. So there was a strong correlation between slaughterhouses in town and the rates of abuse of women and children. And when you think about it, it makes sense, because you're taking people who are killing thousands, sometimes thousands of beings a day, and they're doing this systematically. There is no way that it could not impact their psychology. And from anecdotal studies and talking with people, interviewing people who worked in slaughterhouses, it's coming to light that many of them experience post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, and anxiety because of this moral problem of causing such trauma to other animals. And, again, it's just something that society doesn't speak about a lot, but we need to start exploring this because it's affecting our well-being as well as a society.
Well, that's so powerful. I'm not sure how we can change those circumstances in the moment anyway. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. I mean, this has become an industry not only in this country but in other countries as well.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And I think, one thing is that we definitely need to promote the further exploration of these links, and we shouldn't be afraid to talk about them. And I also think that, each of us has a lot of power in our own hands with how we spend our money. So, how you spend your money, is your money going towards hurting animals or not hurting animals? And so that's a decision that we each have to make, and we each can make every day we go out to the grocery store, or every day we go out and buy clothes and we buy cosmetics. These are things that we can be asking ourselves. And is what I'm buying causing harm, or is it helping?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it comes back to understanding we all have choices that we can make that make a difference.
Absolutely.
Aysha, in the couple of minutes we have left, is there anything else that you want to share with us that we haven't touched upon?
Oh gosh, it was quite. The book was 5 years in the making, and it was. I traveled around the country, talked with a serial killer, an ex-mobster, a doctor with HIV, and so many other people whose lives were touched in one way by an encounter with an animal. And so it really gave me hope to see how people are starting to recognize how valuable those relationships with animals can be, even if it's a very brief relationship, even if it's just you going out in the woods and you see a fox in the woods, or you see a squirrel and you just take a few moments to watch that squirrel. Each of these encounters with another animal is so good for us, and I was really heartened to hear how so many lives were changed for the better.
Yeah, it doesn't take much. I mean, even if you just go sit in a park and reconnect in that way, just watching the squirrels and the birds, it calms you down. It just brings you back to a place of feeling much more connected and healed. Just one last quick question. If people are interested in learning, first of all, what is the best website for you, so people can learn more about you and what you're doing and your tours and such on, and lectures? Where should they be going?
Sure. So I have a website. It's www.AyshaAkhtar.com. So it's www.AyshaAkhtar.com. I know it's kind of wordy, but and people can reach out to me. You can email me through the website. I love hearing from people. I hear from people all the time, so I really welcome emails.
That's great. So it's AyshaAkhtar.com, and obviously your book, Our Symphony with Animals, which is a fantastic book, really inspiring stories, eye-opening in many ways, is something that I totally recommend to everyone who's an animal lover or wants to share this story with other people who you want to become animal lovers. One last quick question. If people want to learn more about how they can help, whether they want to create a relationship with animals, to go to help out at shelters, or maybe create companion animals or therapy animals. Do you have information on the website where people can go and learn more, and what organizations they can get in touch with?
Yes, I will. It's something on the back of my list, and it's going to be put up very soon. I will have a list of if people are inspired by the stories in the book, how they can reach out to many of the organizations or the individuals that are working to change the lives of humans and animals, and I'll have information how the reader can reach out to these people.
Well, that's great. It sounds like this book has really changed your life.
It really has. It was a great experience. It was, I wanted to, we know that we learn more and we learn better through stories. And so that was the backbone of the book. It's really stories, and then with social sciences and medicine and other things woven in. So it was, I enjoyed writing it in a story form, more so than writing in a dry academic form.
Well, it definitely is entertaining, so that's always a good sign that you have a good book with great stories.
Thank you so much.
But most of all, I really want to thank you for your message, Aysha, reminding us that we are part of this, I call it the web of life. We are connected to nature, and the more we are able to reconnect and find the ways that allow us to reconnect, whether it's get companion animals or just go out into a park or camp out somewhere in the countryside or sit by a lake, whatever it is allowing us to be healed, to heal others, and to understand our greater connection to all of life. So I see that as one of the gifts of your book, at least from my perspective, and I am very grateful to you for bringing that to our attention.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me here. I really enjoyed this discussion.
Yeah, it's been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much, and thank you, my listeners, for joining me on The Love Code. We've been talking with Dr. Aysha Akhtar, who is the author of Our Symphony with Animals on Health, Empathy, and Our Shared Destinies. And until next time, I wish you a week filled with love, peace, and harmony. Bye for now.